Okay, welcome to my second episode of my weekly news show. This episode I'm talking about quite a few topics, and I've introduced a new segment, just trying things out. The first item is socialism, so I'm going to start out with the fact that Bernie Sanders, the independent running for the Democrat position of the candidacy for president next year, is still on the rise in a lot of polls, especially against the Republican foreigner Donald Trump, which a lot of people, including myself, hate, although that bias is not really bias as much as it is the fact that he got bankrupted 4 times. Anyway, the next bit is the fact that Corbyn's speeches have been warped against him. This is one big speech, basically, which is the fact that because of the fact that there was no trial for the death of bin Laden, he called it a tragedy because of the fact that everybody, including Boris Johnson, who is the next news item, was calling for a trial as well. But Corbyn said it in such a way that it could be warped against him for saying that bin Laden's death was a tragedy, which it has been done. The next part of the item is Greece, which is still calling for the EU to relieve it properly because of the fact that the majority of the money the EU has given them has actually been given to the banks rather than to the government, to the people who would be able to use it. And this is leading into the fact that Tsipras, I think that's how you say his name, says that Greece will be out of recession soon, which is quite good because the recession is enveloping the world. Although supposedly a few countries, including Britain, which, I mean, it's kind of a lie that we're out of the recession. We aren't really, because of the fact that we've been borrowing so much, but that's just economics, whatever. Now, also with Corbyn's side is a new movement called Momentum, which is trying to help forge together all the different socialists, because there are a lot of different groups saying that they back Corbyn, and this is just one group saying this is the group that backs Corbyn and is endorsed by Corbyn. And then, on top of that, the anti-austerity marches in Manchester have been seen as violent due to a few isolated cases, including throwing an egg at a Tory, and because it was held at the exact same time and same place as the Tory conference, and was joined by Corbyn. So obviously any kind of violence, including spitting and throwing eggs in a couple of cases, means that it's a violent protest, but whatever. The second item is Boris Johnson, as I've talked about before, and he is interested, as we already knew, in leading the Conservative Party, which is needed because they would need a new leader before 2020, otherwise they won't be able to win, because Cameron has said he's not going to do a third election, and therefore, unless they get a new leader in before the election, at least a year before, I'd say, then it won't be an established leader and people will just think he's an idiot. And along with this, he's had previous secret meetings in Downing Street, which a lot of people have said that might be something to do with that. So, I mean, I wouldn't exactly say that it's definite that he went to the meetings in Downing Street to talk to David Cameron about becoming the next Prime Minister, but it is a weird thing that he became an MP shortly after that, because he hadn't ran in so long because of the fact that he was Mayor of London. Okay, and after that, in the Tory conference, he was being called a Tory scum by the anti-austerity marchers, and in response, he has called them a mob of assorted crusties with nose rings, and he's referring to Tory scum as Tories cum. Bit of a warped understanding of the world. After this, there's a slight tragedy. I'd say the only tragedy of this week is of what I've seen, although there might be a few things that have been censored out. This definitely has. Not to the majority of the world, but to Russia. Putin has accidentally bombed Iran whilst he was bombing Syria, as we already knew last week. And it's terrible because of the fact that he was just sending missiles over Iran, but because of the fact that it's not a very good system. I mean, any missile isn't a very good system. They're going to kill somebody. But the space that in Iran that was bombed is now being fought by ISIS to try and take over. On top of this, there's a possible global recession, which a lot of economists have been saying. I'm not an economist myself, although I've read a few books, but I wouldn't say that makes me an economist. I'm just saying the last time that this happened, last time there was a global recession called the Great Depression, if anybody remembers that thing, there was an entire red movement at that point. There was the New Deal in America, the most socialist thing probably to ever happen in America, except possibly some things under Lyndon B. Johnson, although they were just improvements onto the fact of the New Deal, which was a comprehensive welfare state. Labour movement in Britain and majority of Europe and obviously the Commonwealth, which formed the Labour Party, which is now one of the two main parties in the House, because before that point it was the Tories and the Liberals, also known as the Whigs, which were the first party in the House, obviously. Then the other one, which is pretty obvious to everyone, is the October Revolution, which is where Russia had new rulers in the form of the people. Anyway, onto the next segment, the Remember the Victims segment. Happily, very happily, there is only one part of this segment as of yet, and that is those killed in the Russian strikes at Iran. But there may have been other things that were hidden. I should probably pay more attention to the entire world, second by second, to be honest, but I've got other things to do sometimes. And now we're going to go on to the good news segment, which is quite a good segment this time, although I've kept it a bit short because there isn't that much bad news. Like, the majority of the news is just news. So the good news segment, we've got new relations between Cuba and the US, which is quite good because of the fact that the last time they had any relations was when Nixon was trying to kill the Cuban president, and when his followers were also trying to do the same, because of the fact that the leader of Cuba was Fidel Castro, who was a communist. Of course, he was overrun later on, and now they have a different form of government. But into the next part, there is a Sikh bakery. Sikhs is in the religion of Sikhism, the people who follow that, the Sikhs, that has been formed in Syria to help the Syrian refugees, which is quite brilliant. And then another part is that there's a place in Canada called Medicine Hat, Alberta, and they have eradicated homelessness. And here is the massively brilliant idea that they've had that obviously nobody else could ever think of. Just put the homeless into the houses that are empty, and then you don't have any homeless people. It's like, how could you think of that? What kind of mind do you have to have? Do you have to have, like, fucking Red Ed's mind or something, as fucking Cameron would say? And then the final one is that there's a new thing today, actually. When I'm recording it, I might actually be uploading it tomorrow like I did last week, called a thing called Social Saturday, and this is hosted by Old Spike Bakery, which is basically this coffee shop that hired a homeless person, which is quite great. And now the coffee shop can't really work without the homeless person. Okay, the next segment, the new segment, is music, because I really like music and I don't feel I get into it enough in any other way, although I've been trying to play the drums a bit more recently. I'm starting with it's not a weekly thing, I'm just giving you some newish releases that I think are really good and you should probably go check out. The first one is The Dead Weather's Dodge and Burn, which is very recently. The second is Creeper, The Callous Heart. I've not had enough time to listen to that one, so I don't know if it's that good or not. Third is one of my favourite albums of all time, Wolf Alice, My Love Is Cool, and Wolf Alice are quite a new band. They have somewhat of a following, but not as much as they should get anyway. There's a punk band called The Nemembrants, and they've come up with an album called Dark Matter or Dark Energy. And then the standout for rock is the first album by the band The Bohicas from East London, and it's called The Making Of. It's quite an amazing album. I didn't really expect anything like that to come out of this day and age. It kind of brought me back to when music was quote unquote good, although it's always been good. There's always going to be good stuff. It's just you have to look a bit harder to find it. But I didn't even have to look very hard to find this, which is quite good. So, I mean, it's on Spotify is what I really mean. That's the best place to try and find music, really. The second part is metal, which is another one of my favourite genres. A band called Maiden, Iron Maiden, if you ever heard of them, yeah? They have released an album called The Book of Souls, which is quite good. I mean, it's just kind of... The singer is getting old, and you can tell, but he still sounds great, and it still sounds... It's Maiden. It's always going to be Maiden, and it's good. Another band that's somewhat old, bringing out a new album that sounds somewhat similar to all of their other stuff, is Disturbed, The Mobilized. Sounds exactly like every other thing they've ever done, but it's still good because it's Disturbed. So, and then Slayer have brought out a new album called Repentless, which is quite good, but it just sounds like Slayer too. It's just Slayer. Trivium have brought out a new album called Silence in the Snow. Not really into Trivium that much, but I just thought I'd put it in there just in case anybody was. The standout for metal is a unknown-ish band called Hooded Menace. His new album called Glue Memorial. They're a bit screamy, a bit shouty, but the backing is very good. I mean, it reminds me somewhat of a lighter version of Monomouth's backing. It sounds really nice in that kind of sense. The third genre that I'm doing is electronic, and that's because of the fact that the first Skyhole song in 8 years have been released, and it's made my friend really, really happy, although I'm not that into the song itself, which is Firefly. A lot of people do like it, but for my particular taste, the singing is off with the backing. It doesn't sound like they go together. That's just because Danny Sex Banning has been in so many other things that I know, so it's probably just that. Hertz have released a new album called Surrender. Dream Track have released a new album that's self-titled, which is quite good. I like the electronica of that. Takuya Matsumoto has released a new EP called Assembly, and I think that's really good too. It's really good kind of electronica sounds. There's no standout for electronic, not at least of what I've seen so far. And then the final genre, which everybody always has to talk about, is pop. And that's mainly because of the fact that Halsey has the album Badlands that's come out. I'm not that into it, but it has a massive cult pop following, and I think that it could have one of the best albums, like the best pop albums of recent years. I mean, personally, Marina and the Diamonds have always been the best pop of recent years, but whatever. So the next thing is Selena Gomez with Revival. Not really that into Selena Gomez, but a lot of people are. And then Adam Lambert, who is the person who's the front man of Queen whilst they're on concert and stuff, and he's really good at that. He's released a new single called Another Lonely Night, and there's no standout for pop either. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the news this week, which is a lot shorter than last week, and I'm very sorry about that, but I tried my hardest, you know. Best I can do. The only other thing I could talk about is the fact that Lord Adonis left the Labour Party, and he was one of the possible Blairite, but not really that much of a Blairite from what he did. He was just like a guy, one of the most Labour peers, but he's just moved because he's very smart. He's an intelligent person. He thinks that the Conservatives are probably going to win the next election. It doesn't matter. I mean, all the polls, even on the right-wing websites that have said head-to-head, at least, have shown Corbyn out on top over Cameron every single time. So it doesn't seem like it's going to make that much of a difference whether fucking Lord Adonis or whatever moves to the Tory side, because nobody cares about Lord Adonis. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody gives a shit. Anyway. Some good tea. Some good news. A little bit of bad news. Have a nice day.